Well, what I want to do is I want to start with a story from the Bible that most people don't know much about, just a kind of an obscure story that's tucked away in the Old Testament. I want to basically tell you the story. We'll look at a few verses from it, but that's just going to be a launching off place for us to talk about a subject that we are going to really think about over the next 3 weeks. And then maybe you have not thought about this, but do you know what is 4 Sundays from now? Easter. So these next 3 weeks are going to prepare us for what God wants to do, I think, in this congregation on Easter Sunday, which is just very, very soon upon us. Now, stay with me on the story, and you'll be able to astound your friends at work tomorrow by telling them this great Bible story that you know that they don't know, okay? This happens in the Old Testament. It happens in 2 Kings chapter 6 and chapter 7, and it revolves around a blockade taking place around Israel's capital city. The Arameans had decided the best way to defeat Israel was to choke them off, to be able to make it impassable for anybody to get food into the city. And the Arameans were a much stronger military force at the time. This was after King David had already left and King Solomon had already left. This was much later in the history of Israel. The kingdoms had already been divided. But the Arameans had decided to put a blockade. And because they did that, the people inside the walls of the city were starving to death. 2 Kings chapter 6, verse 25 says it like this: there was a great famine in the city. The siege lasted so long that a donkey's head sold for 80 shekels of silver and a quarter of a cab of seed pods for 5 shekels. Now, I don't know exactly what that means, except a donkey head, which doesn't seem like it would be very valuable, was getting a lot of money because I'm guessing they could cook with it. And do you know what a seed pod, a cab of seed pods is? That's dove dung. I don't know what they were doing with dove dung, but dove dung was being sold at a premium because things were so scarce inside the city. This was a bad, bad situation. Listen to the things that were happening. A woman actually approaches the king and says, "You've got to help me." Inside the walls of the city, pandemonium everywhere. Nobody has any food to eat. And a woman goes to the king and says, "You've got to help me." And the king says in 2 Kings 6:28, "What's the matter?" And this woman, she answers and says, "This woman said to me, 'Give up your son so we may eat him today, and tomorrow we will eat my son.'" Keep reading. "So we cooked my son and we ate him. And the next day I said to her, 'Give up your son so we may eat him,' but she has hidden him." That's pretty horrific. Do you agree? I mean, this is not normal stuff. This is heartbreaking. This is devastating. This is, they have resorted to cannibalism. This is a horrible, horrible thing. Now, this is where the story takes a little bit of an interesting turn. There are 4 lepers who are just outside the gate of the city, but they too are affected by starvation. They don't have any food to eat. They're really in bad shape. And they begin to think to themselves, these 4 lepers, and they begin to talk and say, "We're in a predicament. We don't have anybody who's throwing us food. This is a bad place." Look at what 2 Kings 7:4 says. The lepers put their heads together and they say, "We'll go into the city. If we say we'll go into the city, the famine is there and we're going to die. But if we stay here, we're going to die. So let's go over to the camp of the Arameans and surrender. If they spare us, we live. If they kill us, then we die." Now, you're tracking with me. I want you to make sure you get the story. 4 lepers, everybody's starving in the city. 4 lepers, they're saying, "We got it bad. If we stay here, we're going to die. If we go into our city, we're going to die. Why don't we go to the enemy camp, turn ourselves in? If they spare us, they spare us. If they don't spare us and we die, we die. We're going to die anyway." So, verse 5. "At dusk, they got up and they went to the camp of the Arameans. When they reached the edge of the camp, no one was there." Now, I want you to follow this. This is not just a little camp like you're camping at Stone Mountain. This is a huge encampment. They've had a blockade going on for quite a long time against the city. And all of these resources are there. All of this food is there. All of this stuff is there. And the 4 lepers walk in and it's like, where'd everybody go? Nobody's there. Now, if you read the story further, and maybe you can do this afternoon, what had happened was a loud noise had taken place. The Arameans were startled. They thought that maybe Israel had been able to contact an enemy army. Maybe the Egyptians, maybe some other army was coming in that was going to do battle. So they were so frightened, without even taking their stuff, they just fled to the hills. And so these 4 lepers walk into this huge camp with all this food and all this stuff, and there's nobody there. Verse 8, the men who had leprosy reached the edge of the camp and entered one of the tents and ate and drank. Then they took silver, gold, clothes, and they went off and hid them. They returned and they entered another tent, and they took some things from it, and they hid that also. Now, this next part is what I want you to really think about, verse 9. So they're doing this. You get the picture, right? Famine's taking place over here. These guys have just walked into a gold mine. This is the most fortunate day of their life. And so they are just eating and stuffing. You know what we do, kind of Thanksgiving? They're doing that, just can't believe their good fortune. Verse 9, then they said to each other, what we're doing isn't right. This is a day of good news, and we're keeping it to ourselves. If we wait until daylight, punishment will overtake us. Let us go at once and report this to the royal palace. So there was suddenly this moment of consciousness where they said, as they're wiping gravy off of their face, you know what? This probably isn't right. Our countrymen are just beyond the wall. We need to go report this, because this could be a day of deliverance for people who are desperate for it. As I was reading this story over the last couple of weeks, I thought about that. I tried to put it into a context that I could understand. I've obviously never starved. I've never been in that kind of a situation. But I have stumbled into something that has been the most wonderful, transforming thing of my life. And that's a relationship with God through Christ. It has simply been the greatest thing that I have ever known. I know what it's like to live years with guilt and not realize that God didn't want me to live that way. I know what it's like to have messed up and fallen by the wayside and had people say I was worthless, but only to find out that God says, Ray, I'll never give up on you. I know what it's like to experience all of the joy of walking with the Lord. And sometimes I feel like those guys as I'm wiping gravy off of my face. And I think to myself, this isn't right. I'm having such a wonderful time. And yet I know people who are desperate, who could use what I know, who could be helped by this. But I'm not sharing it with them. Jesus said it was the most natural thing in the world. If you followed him and the Holy Spirit began to flow through you, it would be the most natural thing in the world for you to share him. He said it like this in Acts chapter 1, verse 8. Jesus said, but when the Holy Spirit has come upon you, you're going to receive power, and you're going to tell people about me everywhere. In Jerusalem, that means that area just right around where you live. That's where they were in Jerusalem. Throughout Judea, that's the next wider circle. Samaria, next wider circle. Even to the ends of the earth. When the Holy Spirit is flowing through you, when you know the power of God in your life, you're just going to have this ability to share about me to people. It's going to be an easy, wonderful thing. But for many of us, we put the brakes on. I do it. And I won't tell people about the goodness of God. Why are we like that? I think part of the reason is we have seen people who have done it poorly. We've seen people who have done it maybe abusively. We've seen people who've done it so wrong that we've said, you know what? I know people need it. I know I could share it, but I'm not going to because I don't want to be put in the camp with those folks. Let me give you a little background. I come out of a church background that took seriously the message of bringing people to Jesus. I mean, they took it seriously, and for that, I'm very, very grateful. That was the most important thing in their minds that I could ever be a part of, was bringing people to Jesus. We had a night every week at the church called Visitation Night. How many of you remember Visitation Night, maybe in your church background? Some of y'all have that kind of a background. And the heart of Visitation Night was pure. I have no doubt that it was pure and it was good. And as a young teenager, I went on Visitation Night. I would go with these adults and be a part of that. We were going to talk about our church. We would do what was called witnessing. Sometimes it was called soul winning. I don't know if y'all have heard those terms, but we were going to be a part of that. But as I watched, often it felt intrusive. It didn't feel, something about it didn't feel right. I could sense on the people's end of the house, we were knocking on their door, that maybe they weren't really interested in us being there. But the people I was with, they just plowed ahead. They just plowed ahead because they wanted to make sure that they witnessed that night. It never felt like a genuine give and take to me. It felt like we had something to sell and we were going to do our pitch regardless of what they were feeling on the other side. Then I went to college and I went to seminary. And both at college and seminary, again, telling people about Christ was a big deal where I went to school. That was the most important thing. A book had been written, you'll remember this, Evangelism Explosion. It had been written by a Presbyterian pastor by the name of James Kennedy. And it was a wonderful, wonderful book that basically gave you some things to memorize that would help you tell your story. My denomination kind of stole that book and just basically put another cover on it and called it Continuous Witness Training, but it was the exact same book. And we had classes and we were taught the spiel. We were taught kind of the memorized way to talk to people about Jesus. We even went another step further and we put it in a survey. And then we would go out and we would do surveys of people as if we were really just doing surveys, but the whole point was to get them to a question that we would ask them that would kind of cause maybe their heart to open up just a little bit so we could talk to them about Jesus. I still remember the survey. You'd say, excuse me, sir, I'm taking a religious survey in New Orleans where I went to graduate school, or in Houston where I went to college. I'm taking a religious survey. Do you have just a moment where I could ask you 5 simple questions? Sure. First question, what religious background do you consider yourself? Baptist, Methodist, Assembly of God, Pentecostal, Presbyterian. I'd write it down. Wonderful. Do you attend church? Yes, yeah, we do. We go sometime. How often do you go? Oh, maybe a couple of times a year. A couple of times a year. Great. Now, this fourth question is a little longer, so I want you to hang with me. Have you come to a point in your spiritual life where you know for sure if you were to die tonight, you'd go to heaven? And they'd say, never have thought about that. I don't know. I don't know if you can know that. I don't know if you can know that. And I'd have my little thing that I would say. And I'd say, and if you were to stand before the Lord and he were to ask you, why should I let you enter my heaven? What do you think you would say? And then they'd say their bill and then I would go into my spiel. All right, it didn't feel so corny to me then, but it feels really corny to me now. You know, I mean, it feels icky to me just a little bit now. It's what we did though. It seems manipulative even to me now, but it's what we did. I even took classes in college and seminary where I would learn how to argue with people so I could kind of argue them into my way of thinking so they could know the Lord that I know. Again, I think it started out of a pure place. People knew Jesus was important to them and they wanted us to get the word out, but somehow it got icky. I've never found anybody who was argued into righteousness, ever. For people who like to take that approach, good luck. I think people are charmed into righteousness. I think that's the way it happens. We're charmed into righteousness. Then, of course, I've seen, and you have too, screamers on the streets. You've been downtown and you've seen people with the megaphones who just think if they can just scream louder, people will get this message that Jesus loves them and he doesn't want them to go to hell or whatever, and they just scream. It's a beautiful thing to share your spiritual journey. It is a beautiful thing to share your spiritual journey. And most of us aren't sharing our spiritual journey enough, many not at all. It is what God uses to draw people to himself. It's what he uses. It does not need to be something we fear. It should be a part of our everyday life, but sadly, because we have seen it done wrong or in a way that seems forced to us, you don't do it very much and I don't do it very much, and we are much like the lepers who are eating the chicken saying, this isn't right. This might help somebody who's starving. So, I want us to think over the next 3 weeks about sharing our faith with others. I mean, I really want us to think about it. I want us to do more than think about it. I want us to actually, over these next weeks, begin to do it. Because I believe there are people who live all around us who would love to know the God I described at the beginning, who is forgiving, the God who gives us peace, the God who teaches us things that we never ever knew we could know, the God who is raising us up to another level we didn't think possible. I think there are people all around us starving for that. So I titled today's talk this: how do I shout my story without screaming? How do I get my story out there without screaming and being like the preacher in the park? How do I do that? Is that possible? Can I communicate something that's truly life-giving without being manipulative or without being intrusive? And I want you to know, after a lot of thought, I really think I can. And I'm excited about these next 3 weeks. Jeff and I have talked about this, and this is something that we feel is passionate and important in the life of our church. We believe it's something that can revolutionize our church as we become more comfortable sharing our story. So, here's what I want to do. I want to give you 3, hopefully crisp thoughts. And I think that if we kind of make this, we're going to fill in some of the gaps in the next couple of weeks, but if we make this kind of the foundation, it's going to be very helpful. Number 1, I can shout my story without screaming by the lifestyle I choose to live. I can shout my story without screaming by the lifestyle I choose to live. The best advertisement for Christ is Christians. When they are joyous, when they are kind, when they're embracing, when they're compassionate, that's the best advertisement in the world for Christ. And do you know what the worst advertisement for Christ is? Christians. When they are arrogant, when they are narrow-minded, when they are judgmental, when they have no joy, that's a killer. People look at them and think, I don't want anything you're selling. John Pavlovitz is a wonderful writer. I hope you'll follow him on Facebook. He's a great guy. And he wrote this, I like this. Sometimes the best evangelism is simply telling people you're a Christian and then not being a complete jerk. There's a lot of truth in that. I see people on Facebook all the time who would tell you that they're Christians, but if you read their post, what they seem to communicate is that they're a jerk in most things. So when I say lifestyle, I'm talking about don't be a jerk. I like this quote. I don't know that it's totally true, but I like this quote. Preach the gospel, use words if necessary. Now, I think the idea is let your life be such a wonderful, drawing, warm life that people want to know what you're about. Now, understand something. When I talk about lifestyle, I'm not talking about perfection. I'm not talking about you presenting your life like it's perfect. This turns people off because they know, and this is what's so bad, when you see politicians that kind of, they come across as if they're perfect, and then you find out that they have their scandals and those kind of things, then people say, yeah, that's the way it is. When you act like you're perfect, you act like you have it all together, there's always something hidden, and it's almost always true. So I'm not talking about perfection. That's not what I'm talking about. Many of you know Jane and I traveled recently to California to watch 4 of our 8 grandchildren. They are ages 7, 5, 3, and 1. 7, 5, 3, and 2. He's 2, I guess, right? I don't know how old he is. He's little. He's just little, and I can't understand anything he's saying. And I just try to remember his name. There's so many grandkids. Just Grady. That's Grady. Okay. Anyway, 7, 5, 3, and 2. Now, if I stood up here this morning and I said, boy, keeping those children was so easy. There was so much joy in that. We never had one problem with them. They just love God. They respect us. They love each other. They always obey. What would you think? You'd throw up. You'd throw up because you would know you cannot keep a 7-year-old, a 5-year-old, a 3-year-old, and a 2-year-old and have that be the truth. Now, if I stood up here and I told you the truth, which is this, we do love our grandkids very much, but keeping them for a week is one of the hardest things we have ever done in our life. That there were moments when we lost our cool with them, that they exasperated us. They schemed against us. You just can sense. You just know that they talk baby talk that we don't understand. We don't know what they're saying, but they understand what they're saying. They are sneaky. They try to get each other in trouble. That starts at 6 in the morning. Mimi, he hit me. Big, he took this away from me. Mimi and Big, they told us this. we took them to Yogurt Land or something like that. We took them to Yogurt Land because we want to be good grandparents, and we're thinking, well, let's try that. So we say, y'all get some yogurt, and then how many toppings does your parents let you put on the toppings? Cooper said 7. So I get his yogurt, and they weigh his, and his yogurt costs about $9.32. I said, we got to stop. There's somebody's pulling our leg. This is not the way it's done. Jane made Rice Krispie treats only to have one of the kids say, I don't like Rice Krispie treats. It's like, are you out of your mind? Every kid likes Rice Krispie treats. We've traveled all the way across the country. You're getting Mimi Rice Krispie treats, and you're going to like it. I promise you're going to like this Rice Krispie treat. So anyway, that's the way it really is. Now, when you share that, people say, we get it. We get it because that's life. So I'm not talking about perfection, but I am talking about a life that is changing and growing and a life that has hope in it. Jesus said it like this in Matthew 5:16, in the same way, you need to let your light shine before men, that they may see your good deeds and they may praise your Father in heaven. Again, not perfection. You're not selling people that you're perfect, that you always do it right, that you never have any problems, you never have any mistakes. That's not what we're talking about. But you want people to see in you a growing spirit, something that's growing in you. You know, not perfect, but you're not what you was yesterday. You're moving. That you're learning to embrace all people, even people really different from you. You're learning to embrace them. Why? Because Jesus teaches us to embrace people. You're moving toward a healthy lifestyle. You didn't come from that background. I didn't come from that background, but I want to move that way. Why? Because the body is the temple of God. We want to make sure that we respect it and we live in such a way that honors this, because we want to live our life to the fullest to honor God who has blessed us so much. You want people to know that there's an inner joy that, again, you don't do things right all the time. You fail a lot, but there's an inner joy that's bubbling up inside of you. That there's a life of love that you didn't know was possible, that you're able to laugh at things and you're not as stressed as you used to be because you're realizing there really is hope in Christ. You possess an inner beauty. People won't know exactly how to describe it. They'll say, you know, I don't know that they're physically, it's not physical, but there's something about them that's just beautiful. It's growing. That's what I'm talking about when I say lifestyle. That's a way to shout that God is doing something good when people can look at your life and say, wow. Now listen to this. If your lifestyle is death, people won't want what you have. If your lifestyle is death, if you're negative, crabby, if you're always fraught with fear, if that's your life, people will not want what you have. It's important to get the word out, and one way to do it, a beginning way, is lifestyle. Our neighborhood, we live in a great neighborhood, but our neighborhood is fairly unchurched. And the first few years, Jane and I didn't really know anybody in the neighborhood because we were so busy in the village. And so we finally made a decision a few years ago that we were just going to spend more time trying to do neighborhood things. And it's so sweet what people will say. They don't know us well, but people who don't have any interest in church, no interest in the Lord, that's not on their radar. They will say to us, you guys, we love kind of the vibe that we get from you guys. We love the warmth that we feel. We love that. And that's to God be the glory, because what people are seeing is a lifestyle that is being slowly transformed by Jesus, because that's not us, that's Jesus in us. Second thing I'd say is this: I can shout my story without screaming by developing genuine friendships. Genuine friendships. A mega pastor got in trouble this past week a little bit on Facebook because a clip from one of his sermons came out, and I know what he was saying, and I don't think he meant it wrong, but how it came across was, you need to go to a mega church, because if you have teenagers and you're in a mega church, then your teenagers will have all Christian friends, and that's where their whole life will be, and that's the way it's supposed to be. And I get that, and so I didn't I'm not jumping on the hate bandwagon, because this is a great man. This is not a bad guy. But I think probably what needs to be communicated is learn how to be friends with people inside the church and outside of the church. It's okay to be friends with people outside the church. Now, some people say, well, now, wait a minute, doesn't it say somewhere we're not supposed to love the world? You're very smart, it does. 1 John chapter 2, verse 15 says this, do not love the world or anything in the world. If anyone loves the world, love for the Father is not in them. But what the text actually means is don't embrace the world's system, how the world thinks about things. In Scripture, the word world in the New Testament can be translated from three different understandings of what world means. One can mean people. For God so loved the world, people, that he gave his only son, that whosoever believed in him should not perish but have everlasting life. The world can also mean the earth, the dirt. Sometimes when it describes the world, it's talking about the dirt. But the world also can mean the system of how things are, how politics is done, how power is perceived, how love is thought about. Those things that as Christians we say, you know what, y'all may use the same words, but we're followers of Jesus. We think about those things in a totally different way. We're not about power. We're not about, our understanding of love is different. Our understanding of beauty is different. Our understanding of politics is different. So here's my point. If Jesus is our role model, and he should be, then we need to make sure that we love the world, people. And in loving the world, we need to make sure that we are developing friendships with people who aren't just in the church. Jesus was called, as the number one title he was given by people who didn't like him, a friend of sinners. And what that meant was a friend to people who didn't go to church. That was the title. He's a friend to people who don't go to church. And I wish that would be said of each one of us. We're friends with people beyond the walls of our church. Philippians, Paul wrote this and said, don't be interested only in your own life, but be interested in the lives of others. That's been revolutionary to Jane and me as we've become friends with people beyond the walls of the church. If every person here would make genuine friendships with people outside of the walls of our church and genuinely love those people, and listen, we're not loving them because we have a scheme to somehow get them here. That's not the point. We love them whether they ever come to church here or not. We just love them. But as we get to know them and we serve them and we break bread with them and we enter life with them and we cry with them and we share our journey and they share their journey, you know what? Some of them are going to want to share a spiritual life with you. And it comes when we make friendships. Churches do it differently. Some do direct mail, and if you have money and you want to send out direct mail, I guess that's one way. Some knock on doors. That worked at one time. I don't know if it works today. But I wonder what would happen if we just lived like Jesus and we just made friendships with people outside of our church, genuine friendships where we really love them with the love of Christ. And over time, I believe some of them would want to share spiritual journey with you. Third thing I want to say is this. I can shout my story without screaming by being willing to simply share my faith story. I can shout my story without screaming by being willing to simply share my faith story. This is where I fear most of us are bashful. Many here are like the lepers in the story. We've discovered something that is unbelievably good. It has saved us. It has changed us. It's growing us. But for some reason, we just think we should keep it to ourselves because we don't want to be offensive to people. And I get it. Offensive is bad, but you don't have to be offensive. There's a way to learn how to just talk about faith that is as natural as breathing, that is not manipulative, that's not intrusive, that just flows out of you. And when you do that, you are going to find it resonating with people in such a way that you are going to be able to show them you have discovered the mother lode. And you haven't even obtained just a teeny tiny portion of what is so unbelievable, but it is available to all who want it. Come all who are thirsty and drink. Now, here's some things to remember when you're sharing your story. These are common sense to many, but maybe for some they're not. This will keep you from being offensive. If you want people to listen to your story, you must be willing to genuinely listen to their story too. Can I tell you something? Christians don't get that. If you want people to listen to your story, you must be willing to listen to them. And listen, when I used to do those surveys, I'll let you in on a little secret. I wasn't listening to their story. All I wanted to do was get to my story. Because I had my story down, and if I could get to my story, then I could see if I couldn't get them saved. But now I know that that's not the way it's supposed to work. I need to be willing to genuinely listen. Listening is a lost art. What you want is dialogue, not monologue. And guess what? You might learn something. It's crazy to me that we grow up and we think that we have the whole truth and we can never learn anything from anybody because we grew up in Riverdale, Georgia, and we got the whole message of truth and nobody else could have anything they could add to it. Does that seem goofy a little? It seems goofy to me. I have sat with Hindus and I have learned wonderful things that have actually translated for me into understanding God better. I have sat with Muslims and listened to them talk as we dialogued and realized, wow, that's a profound thought, and that is a true thought. That is a true thought, and yet it came to me through someone who was a Muslim. Important. I listened to a friend's story a few weeks ago. I remember this well. We were sitting in a little small group. This friend, we just gave people a chance to tell their story, and we said, you know what, nobody's going to be judged when you tell your story because it's your story. It's your story. This friend talked about growing up in church every Sunday morning, Sunday night, Wednesday night, then talked about how the church had really hurt them and how they had gone on a spiritual journey and how they had found themselves in every religion you could imagine in and around Atlanta. And then this person said this, I now consider my religion to be compassion. Compassion for people, compassion for animals, compassion for all things. That's where I am in my journey. And you know what, as I sat there and listened, it wasn't like the old Ray of 20 years ago who was thinking, okay, I've got to pull her into the Jesus camp. You know what it was? I was able to listen and say, that's beautiful. That sounds like what I want to be about too. Religion or spirituality of compassion. That sounds, I like that. I like that. Now, do I hope in time maybe this person will see a fulfillment of that in the person of Jesus? I would love that. But for this moment, what I wanted to do is I just wanted to listen to this person. Don't come across so arrogant where you're the only one who has something to say. Everybody's story is important. Let them say it. A second thing to remember about sharing your faith is this. You can have confidence when you're talking about your story because it's your story. You see, you may not have confidence with going through the Bible stories. You may not have confidence with what did Paul mean in Romans 3:23, all have sinned and fall short of God's glory. Or, well, you may not feel like that's where you are right now. I get that, but you know what? I'm confident with my story. I know how depressed I have been when I have blown it and I thought that I should have lived better than I lived, but I didn't. I know what that's like, and I know what it's like to hear God's voice resonate in me. Ray, I'm not through with you. I know what it's like to not be able to forgive somebody and then to sense from God that I could forgive somebody and to experience what that's like. I know what that feels like. It's my story. So you can't argue with me about my story. I know my story. And you know your story, and you can have confidence. You don't have to be a theologian. All you have to do is be willing to share it. There's a story in the Gospels I love. Jesus heals a blind guy, and the Pharisees can't believe it because he heals him on Saturday, which is the Sabbath. So if you heal somebody on the Sabbath, you must be a sinner. So they keep saying to the blind guy, is he a sinner? Tell us, is Jesus a sinner? Because he healed you on the Sabbath. You were blind, now you see, but you're doing it on the Sabbath, so is he a sinner? And the blind guy says, listen, whether he's a sinner or not, I don't know. I just know I couldn't see yesterday and I can see today. That's all I know. I like that. I can relate to that. I was blind in some ways yesterday. I can see today. That's all I know. So that's something to give you confidence. I did a funeral yesterday, 16 years ago. Y'all may remember this. 16 years ago, I did a funeral. It was a double homicide in Lovejoy. It was really horrible. It was a young mom and her 2-year-old child. And after that funeral, I did that funeral, and then shortly thereafter, someone close to the family of the brother of the mother who'd been murdered, he took his life, and then the dad of the girl who died, he died, and then someone else close to the family died, and then another person took his life. Anyway, there were 6 funerals within 6 months all around this one event. This past week, the mother, the matriarch of the family, she passed away, and I did her funeral yesterday. I had people come up to me all yesterday afternoon and say that when they had struggles with forgiveness, because she had to learn how to forgive the one who murdered her daughter and granddaughter who started the whole process. She had to learn how to deal with that. And even though this lady wasn't even in church, that wasn't really her thing, she still would say to these people, you've got to learn to forgive. God has taught me through a lot of trials that I have to learn to forgive. And I was thinking, if this lady could go through what she has gone through and never have the benefit of a church family, and yet she could still share her story in such a way that moved people, how much more can we share our story? How we learn to forgive. When I say share your story, I'm talking about where you are in your life right now, how you're learning how to forgive, how God has given you hope, how you've realized you have another chance, how you're overcoming fear, how you've overcome an addiction that you thought you never could overcome, how you have experienced answered prayer and you really believe that it came from the hand of God, how you have experienced the love of your faith family. You never knew you could have such love from so many people, how you're experiencing peace. When I say your story, I'm talking about all these things. I'm not just talking about how you gave your life to Jesus when you were 12 years old. I'm talking about what's happening in your life today. What are you learning today? What is your faith walk today? You don't want to be guilty of enjoying it all and then not sharing it with people who desperately need it. Another thing to remember is this: faith is a process. Don't panic like the pressure is on you to win the person. How crazy I was much of my life to think the pressure was on me to win somebody to Jesus. Early in my life as a pastor, I would stay up every Saturday night, all Saturday night. You know why? Because I was scared to death that somebody would come to church and somehow I would not be perfect. I wouldn't share it perfectly. I wouldn't say it just the right way. And I would worry all Saturday night like somehow I was the one who was saving people. What a relief it was when I realized it's God who saves people. I'm just one part of the chain. Paul said it like this: we have a role to play. He said, I planted the seeds in your heart, Apollos watered it, but who made it grow? God made it grow. I planted the seed, Apollos watered it, but it was God who made it grow. I'm going to share one final thing, then we're going to quit. If you're a little nervous about sharing your story, I want to give you just a good place to start. That's not manipulative, it's not intrusive, but it's a track you can begin to run on, and it's at least a starting place. And I urge all of you to write this down, because this could be so beneficial to somebody inside the city who doesn't yet know what you are learning about every week. You ready? Say this to them: would you come with me to my church next Sunday? That's hard, isn't it? That is so hard, but that's it. Do you know every statistic I've looked at says that a good portion of your friends, if asked that question, would come to church with you? They would, and they'd come to church with me. And then you just simply follow up, and you will be amazed at how many of your friends and family would come if you simply invited them. And then when they get here, I have a promise to make to you. We will do our very best to share the beautiful story of Jesus. We'll do our very best to share, not that it's on us, but we're going to do our very best to share the story of God's love for the world. We will introduce them to Jesus, but we'll do it in a way that we think is the way Jesus would want us to do it. I've learned this about Jesus. Jesus likes to be likes to be introduced, but he doesn't like being crammed down people's throats. So we will never cram him down people's throats. I believe with all my heart people are going to respond to the beautiful message of Jesus. So here's my challenge to close. Look at your life. It's not perfection, but look at your life. Is your lifestyle one that could be drawing people to God? Are you developing some friendships where you could one day, as you open up and become better friends, then maybe one day they would want to know about your Lord and about your church? Will you this week talk about your faith, some part of your faith, to somebody who's not a churched person? And then finally, will you begin inviting and bringing people to church? Listen, we have experienced something far too great to keep it only for ourselves. Would you bow your heads, please?